Thanks for joining us. I'm Cami Rapson. The Wisconsin Supreme Court strikes down the state's 1849 law on abortion in a decision released this morning. The justices ruling 4-3, saying the 1849 law is overruled by a newer state law criminalizing abortions only after a fetus can survive outside the womb. The older law made it a felony for anyone other than the mother who, quote, intentionally destroys the life of an unborn child, end quote. That ban was in effect until it was nullified by Roe v. Wade in 1973, but it was never officially repealed. Attorney General Josh Kaul spoke about the ruling today in Madison, praising the court's decision.
Today's ruling marks a major victory for reproductive freedom following the uncertainty and harm to women's health that have resulted from the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
In response to the court's decision, Wisconsin GOP Chair Brad Schimming said, quote, the Wisconsin Supreme Court's role is to follow the Constitution, not to make the law. This issue should be resolved in the legislature and by voters, not by far left justices parading as legislators, end quote.